What's the
Wonderful. So let's remove this overlay. And here we are.
yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all out there. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Brewer. How are you?
Good afternoon, Isaac. I'm doing fine. And you?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. I just came back from East Africa, hanging out in Kenya and Tanzania with the safari and everything. So I feel fresh.
Very good to hear that.
Yeah. Um, so let me just share a little bit with my folks. And then you can come in and share. So folks, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the OGees show. Where we hope that ideas will meet action, vision can meet accountability. And today, we are joined by a man who has intricate knowledge of our economic history. And he has been innovative in how he presents that, how he describes the different periods. And I don't know that he has really come to the public with this knowledge. So it's just something that we want to do. Some of those Liberians who are doing great things, who are operating in different spheres that our regular people don't normally have an opportunity to engage with, we feel an obligation to bring them to you. So today we'll try to see how he can delve deeper into our economic history past, look at the present, how it's situating, and then probably give us some insights about how or what it will really take for us to, because people still will need healing, people still will need building, and then to move this nation forward to direction of prosperity. He's well, so what's the academic word for it, Herbie, when you go to the same university for undergrad, for masters and PhD? I know my nephew called it, I think, triple threat or something, because he's doing that at Northeastern in mechanical engineering, then robotics. Then now he's doing a PhD in mechanical and robotics. So, what do you call it at the University of Maryland? Because that's where you did your bachelor's, master's, and PhD.
Yes. I really don't know. I guess that would just make me a bona fide terp, right?
Right.
Our master.
Exactly.
I
A
know.
triple terp.
Total terp.
I did my master's in business administration at University of Maryland too. So we both share the same alma mater, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, folks, this is a man who has written some epic pieces on the anatomies or antinomies. So this word is something that he has to define for us. Okay, um, of Black identity formation in West Africa from 1820 to 1848. That's a period most of us don't really resonate with. Then he wrote something about the Chesapeake Free Blacks and the origins of the Liberian state. That's something we should connect with. And then he did Restless and Ambitious Men, the 1823 Monroeville Remonstrance, Anti-Slavery and Self-Determination in the Development of Black Atlantic Political Thought. So he's not limiting his writings to just Liberia. Is the Black Atlantic, is West Africa, and it's expensive. He's written some other stuff, but the ones that I thought kind of relate to us as Liberians is what I have brought forth. So I don't know, I've done an honest introduction of you, Dr. Brewer, but you can share with us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm a product of St. Patrick's High School. I will say that much for your
Big
audience.
ups to St. Patrick. Big ups.
Class of 1975, right? Some 50 years
Wow.
ago. An important and solid foundation. Um,
Wonderful.
and although I have spent the majority of my life outside of Liberia, my heart remains there. Um, so my interest really is is the African world, and so that includes, of course, Africa, but it also includes our traces, our branches into all the parts,
Right.
Europe, all of the Americas, North America, South America, the Caribbean, Asia, the Indian Ocean. We're everywhere.
Wow. Wow.
So that's really where my interests lie. And Liberia, actually, of course, for me, um, forms an important occupies an important space in this global African firmament, in this and in the history of the making and remaking, of Black identity and what it means to be a Black person and African in the modern world. So and that encompasses all of the different aspects of our lives, meaning the culture, the intellectual history. It means the economic and social and political history.
You gave me goosebumps just talking about all this stuff, Doc, because recently, they have been posting, some people going back into our history and trying to find images or stories about, how we did back then, compared with now. And you talk about identity. I mean, did the war make us lose our identity? I mean, where are we with regards to that before we even get into the history part and the economic history part?
Yeah.
Where is our identity today compared to where we were before?
You see, I will take I like the question, and it's an important question, and it's always interesting. I like to approach it from another kind of angle, which is that, and as an historian, I can't help it. I can't help but do that, which is that identity is always contested. It is never something that is settled. And I don't care how far back you go, identity is under constant challenge, transformation, evolution. And so when you talk about identity, you always want to know at what point in the life of a people, really. And so if we use that framework and we come to the war, our recent war, that's like a turning point as well. And so maybe as we're still in the post-war years, it's still fresh in people's memories. I tend to always take the long view, longue durée, the French say.
I was going to ask about that view, because some people say, oh, it's been 40 years, we should be able to move on and everything. But you are looking at it from a historical perspective, and you think it's not enough time.
No, 40 years is not really that long in the life of a nation and a people. And the Liberian people have existed for much, much longer than that. And so we're in a post-war settlement. So things are settling. And as things continue to settle, it will become clearer and clearer, I think, this kind of reconstituted identity. And I can see it in so many different ways. It's numerous ways that this new identity is emerging for the 21st century and beyond at this particular moment in time. And it'll contain elements of the past, but it'll also incorporate new elements that come into it. And that is just how things evolve.
Wonderful. And, an issue that has been hot recently, I don't know if you follow the diaspora conference, or the increased emphasis on diaspora wanting to be involved in what's happening in Liberia, beyond their remittances. And also government is talking about, diaspora investment fund, diaspora bonds, and other stuff. What's your thoughts on the Liberian diaspora, how the body is, whether there's any kind of collaboration, real cooperation, and real impetus to move in terms of development in Liberia?
From afar, because I'm not intimately involved in those matters, but just observing from afar, I like what I see. And in many ways as well, I see it as inevitable, one way or the other. And if I may say to the Liberian audience, there have been changes. For example, think about all the things that have happened over the last even 20 years. There's this large movement of people out of the country. That's one. And number two, there's this continued bond with the homeland. So people didn't just leave and then cut off their ties. So people send remittances, people return home. There's a regular, interaction. So both which is influencing. It has a mutual reciprocal influence that continues. And so one of the outcomes was this change in the law, the legal structure, over the question of citizenship.
Right.
And so that, for example, to me is like a concrete manifestation of that transformation. Something that you might ask the question, why did it take only now to do that, to change that law? Why wasn't that law there from the start? Why wasn't that law there in the 1960s, etc.? So I'm saying, things happen, history moves along, and under new circumstances, we adapt. So the Liberian people, the Liberian nation itself is thinking about and in the process changing, how it goes about conducting its business and how it relates, to itself. And so I think that the diaspora is a fact of life, and it's a kind of recognition of that. I think that in 20, 30 years, it'll be even more so, and perhaps in ways that we might not even think. And it's important to see that the government of the day, is facilitating it. But to me, whether or not the government is there, whichever government, I think these ties are more powerful than that, and these ties will demand it, and will, what, those things will happen. People will do those things. I think it's smart to be able to think about it and structure it perhaps in a way where you can focus where you want people's investments to go. But folks are still going to, as they accumulate some of those funds, they'll be building their houses, for retirement, willy-nilly. Other people will come to provide services for the retirees. Those things will happen, whether or not the government is doing something or not, and whichever government. I'm just saying I think those are like natural. That's a natural phenomenon.
I found myself in agreement, just that some of us, we want it to happen in our lifetime. So the way you have given it long view, we may not see it, but we can always continue to try to set the foundation. That's why I always encourage, all of us in our age group per se, because you're not more than 10 years older than me, so I can probably say I'm in that age group.
We're in the same generation. Yes, we are.
So, I'm encouraging us, because we have so much to give back, especially those who have been in the diaspora, who have been successful for the most part. Many of them are, and being able to, see if they can consider Liberia for their retirement situation. From a historical perspective, we see some diasporans from other countries, whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's Ghana, whether it's Rwanda, really engaging back. But have you seen any massive migration of diaspora people back to their homeland? Because for now, it's like African Americans trying to go to Ghana, or even Kenya. I was there and was engaged with some African Americans. But have you seen people from their own home, besides forced deportation historically, let's say sending Liberians from Ghana back to Liberia, or even the recent people who were living in the camps in Ghana being remigrated back to Liberia? Have you seen any diaspora people of their own accord in a critical mass moving back to their home? Is there anything like that?
The short answer would be no.
Okay.
And people study those things. There are statistics that are kept about that. The International Labor Organization, ILO,
right?
International Organization of Migration. They keep statistics. They pay attention to that. No, the short answer is no. And what's interesting is to understand what's going on and how this is, why this is the case or not the case. And so in that regard, Liberia is no different from other African countries, nor is Africa different from other regions of the world. And so we're in a period over the last 40 years or so, more or less, this sort of the so-called era of globalization and neoliberalism, where there's been much more migration of people across borders than, say, 80 years ago. Right. So I'm saying that this is part of a larger phenomenon, and there are explanations for the macro picture why those things are happening. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean people don't have those ties. Those ties exist. It's the nature of the relationship, is unique in many ways, actually. Though again, because these things are complicated, they're complex. Though again, if we went really way back in the history, much of human existence is migration. Human beings are migrating. We're migrating constantly, and we've been migrating forever. And that means going both to new lands, but it also means returning. People returning. That sort of thing. Indeed, if we look at some of the oldest, the holy books, they're filled with stories of migration and return. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I'm trying to say that this is like a subtle part of human nature, if you like, the question of migrations.
Yes, wonderful. Yes, so we just look forward to that remigration back home and people being involved and really getting stuff. But let's try to touch on the topic now. Let's go back in time
Right.
when Liberia was supposedly the Green Coast, right? Like
Well,
GRAIN, right?
right. Well, it all depends on who's calling who's calling what, and so just a little saying, if you don't define yourself, somebody will
Somebody will
define you.
define you. That's
And
been our problem.
and many people have that problem. So um, we have to sort of understand how these names themselves emerged and the context. So Liberia would not be the place, our home, the place we call Liberia today, would not be unique in terms of names that were assigned to it.
Right.
All of the names along the African coast were assigned by primarily Portuguese, but let's just say European mariners,
Right.
starting from the 15th century, as they are, for their own reasons, coming along the coast of mostly West Africa. And so, for the most part, there are exceptions. They're assigning names and they're drawing maps for their own purposes, for their own education and clarification and instruction. And they're drawing maps, and then they're taking them and says, this is what's there. And so they're redefining, if you like, the place. And so the name originally assigned to what today is Liberia was both the windward coast,
Hmm.
and if you think about it, it's a nautical term, is the direction of the wind when people are sailing, in that direction. And that windward coast went from Cape Mount all the way down to the sort of Ivorian side of Kavala, right?
Right.
Cape Palmas, Assini region. And that was the windward coast on those maps. Uh, Others around the same time, because they're competing nomenclatures, others are saying Green Coast. And then that also is connected to the commodity that folks might see there. So there's a Gold Coast, a commodity, those sorts of things. So the coasts have both nautical names, but also the names of products that might come there.
All right.
There's nothing indigenous about those terms.
Okay. So what's really indigenous to us at that time in terms of our economy? Was it just simple tree? Was it pepper? Was it ivory? Was it pepper? Because Alligator too was a reference at that time, probably too. So, what was the market like? The economy like right before the settlers came in 1822?
So first of all, I would again put a historical lens and I would basically divide. I would periodize. I would basically divide the Liberian past,
Right.
as far as the economy is concerned, into four distinct periods.
Right.
It makes it easier for us to really analyze what's happening, to differentiate things, what changes, and including what the continuities might be. But
Right.
we're talking about economics. So really what we're talking about is production, all right? That's our focus.
Mhm.
How goods and services were being produced in these distinctive periods. And we look for characteristics of that features that explain that period, that exemplified what was happening. And one of the things that is always important to look at is the division of and specialization of labor. What did people spend most of their time doing in productive activity, that sort of thing. And so and how do people produce a surplus, right, for themselves, for the society, those sorts of things. So if we're using those benchmarks, right, the specialization of labor, and how in production, and that sort of stuff, we can discern. We can look at what I call first a pre-modern period. I can come back and we can explain that, and then see it replaced by what I might call the early modern period, which again is an important point in the transformation of that area. And then we get the modern period, which itself has parts of it, and parts of it overlap. It has different sub periods, if you like, between that. And then my fourth period would be the late modern period, which is kind of like up to where we are. And so we can look at we can take each of them in turn. That's so it's pre-modern, early modern, modern, and late modern.
Okay.
Those are the periods of economic history of the country.
So what's a divisor? What are you using to separate those periods? Is it the distinction between the economies that existed or the people or what?
Yeah, so I said, number one of the things we're looking at is the division of and the specialization of labor, and what people are, how labor itself is used, and
Okay.
what's being produced, right? So
Right.
so that would be an important part of this thing. So if we take the pre-modern period, right, we're basically talking about, we're going by hundreds of years,
Right.
right? You might even call it 1,000 years, because we're not exactly clear about a specific time period, but basically it's like from the start, if you like, right? From the start. What are the features of an economy? What are people producing? And in that pre-modern period, what you have is a sort of kin-based farming collectives, communal systems, right? And people, and in the case of our country, what would have become our country, one of the staples that folks produced was rice. And so they built irrigation and they did rice farming, right? They're involved in that. That's what folks are involved in. And this is a system, this pre-modern system. You specifically, you ask for what's the marker in a pre-modern system? People are essentially producing to consume. That's an important definition there. You're
Right.
producing to consume.
Subsistence, right? Subsistence.
Self-sufficiency. And to kind of put it in a popular term, you could say people produced what they ate, and they ate what they produced, and that was it. For the most part, that's the system they have.
Okay.
What would mark it off is when we get to the modern system, people would be producing for sale, producing for a market, right? Producing for example, export, mass production, that sort of thing. That's a distinctive, different type of economic structure. So the pre-modern economic structure is one of self-sufficiency, producing what you eat, eating what you produce. But that system doesn't mean that all people are just simply farmers. They are, but the nature of the kind of work they do, right? As I said, is kin-based. It is as collectives, people have labor obligations, but there are also people who are craftspeople, right? Craftsmen and craftswomen. There are artisans in the system, specialized labor, but it may be subordinate to the overall goal of producing food, right, for the survival and the reproduction of the society. And the crafts that people develop, their skills are very wide ranging, because in the case of our region, there's metallurgy or iron making,
Right.
which goes way back, right? So we have smithing, we have blacksmiths, ironsmiths, right? And you have people within that system who create that. You have people who are weavers, both in terms of cloth and textile, in terms of baskets. There's pottery makers, and on and on. So you have these specific types of specialist, artisanal, skilled people within that society, or those societies. Also, those societies went beyond just simply producing, in this case, like rice or some tubers. They would also be people producing cola, which is an important part of that early pre-modern period.
Right.
Extensive cola cultivation, and some of that, and in terms of the cola now, it sort of introduces to the whole economy the question of trade, right? Because cola is something that's traded. Producing pepper also for trade. You talked about Malagueta. Right? Those are items produced for trade. And so once those items come into the picture, you start to see the economy slightly transforming. But trade itself is not the dominant economic activity. The dominant economic activity is food cultivation, food for eating.
Wow. Okay.
Those would be the characteristics of that very early kin-based pre-modern communal system, where again we're not talking in notions like private property, exclusive private property. Those are not features of those very early systems. And again, these are systems that go way back that I'm referring to.
So you talk about irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
And we are a country that, and I'm just pushing this forward a little bit. We are a country that have 6 months of rainfall.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how come we have not developed the ability to grow food all year round?
Mm-hmm. Liberia, up until quite recently, again, we're looking at that long history, and quite recently for me is the 1960s, 70s. Recent Liberia, for most of its existence, was self-sufficient in food. The question of like the big importation of rice, and we'll come to that when we discuss the modern days,
Right.
is a recent thing. Like Liberians grew their food and grew what they needed to eat, and that sort of thing up until not to a few decades. So that's a whole other, and we'll discuss this, but I just think it's better. I would like to just get to look at the sort of the chronological development, if you like,
Okay.
of the economy and economic activity
Right.
in the country.
So since there was not much trade at that time,
Mm-hmm.
um, at what point will you say we moved away from that, self-sufficiency model of,
Mm-hmm.
living and doing, eating, growing what we eat
Yeah.
versus trying to really trade,
Mm-hmm.
not only in Liberia but outside Liberia? At what time did that transition happen? Can you put a time
Yeah.
frame to it?
Yeah. So good transition here. And in discussing the evolution, the movement from that pre-modern to what I call the early modern, it's important for us to keep in mind that these things will overlap. So I'm not saying, in starting in 1500, when 14 whatever, when Pedro de Cinta landed, bang, that's when trade started. And no, the point
Right,
is,
right. It's not
and today,
automatic.
yeah, and today you might even see traces of that old communal system. That kin-based farming collective still exists. And they were
Yes.
trying the other day when they did the land reform laws to kind of, institutionalize some of those very old, institutions, some of those very old traditions and customs. So these things can coexist, but we're talking about what the dominant forms are, the ones that determine everything else in the society, that shape, how the society is otherwise organized.
Right.
So the newly emerging early modern system, which is a big emphasis on trade, and that eventually undermines actually the old kin-based collective farming and that sort of thing, is really you find very early traces of it at the end of the 15th century, coming with the Europeans who start to come, and then in the subsequent centuries, the 15th, the 16th century, the 17th century, there's more of that. And this is something Liberians kind of like usually just draw a blank on: the coming of the transatlantic slave trade to Liberia, right?
Hmm.
And so when trade transforms economies, it would be that way. It would be in terms of the European importation, the European arrival on the scene, right, and the establishment of this system in Liberia, and the trade that existed, and again I'll remind people, because it's not just black or white. Um, while the system was predominantly agrarian and people producing for what they needed, there was some trade. Cola trade, the salt trade was another trade that was there. But the direction of that trade and composition of that trade was to the north, right? So they went into the Sahel region, the Savannah region, the northern
Wow.
part, what today would be Mali and those places. That's where that trade went up and down, right? Those items that were being produced. That's how they got out, and that's how people traded. And those are the trade routes that were and trade relations that were established. With the coming of the Europeans, basically it broke that trade arrangement, and the trade shifted to the Atlantic, right, away from the interior and going further north, and now coming from the interior to the Atlantic. And so an entire infrastructure, this takes a few hundred years. This system I'm explaining here, it's not overnight. It's not a snap of the finger. A lot of resistance, lots of transformations. But what ends up happening is that this new system develops an infrastructure to supply this transatlantic slave trade. And over the course of 300 years or so, tens of thousands, over 100,000, hundreds of thousands of Liberians who would be the ancestors of Liberians, are captured and taken into that, of course, involuntarily, taken into forcibly taken into that huge system of labor supply for the plantations of the Americas,
So,
and
so
that system completely
is it
it
really clearly
destroys.
documented, Doc? Is it really clearly documented that
Well, it's
the
clearly
area that
documented.
is Liberia today, that slaves actually came from there?
Oh yeah, clearly documented.
Okay,
Over almost over documented. Although actually there's some dispute, not over whether or not there was slavery, over the size of it, and a few other historians who think that the numbers that have been provided underestimate actually how many
really?
people were taken. Yeah,
Wow.
underestimate actually how many people were taken forcibly from the coast, from our area, and put into the transatlantic system. Nobody, nobody. I cannot stress this enough. Along the coast from Senegal to Angola, no coast, no area, escaped this system, right? No coast escaped it. Everybody, one at one point or another, eventually gets submerged into it, gets enmeshed. Really, is what into it. But now, for our purposes, again, we're looking at the economy. It transforms these economic relationships that people have,
Right.
and so one of the things it does, of course, is that it sucks a labor force out, and that's always bad.
Mm-hmm.
It transforms social and political relations people have. So some people become powerful. Some local people become powerful as agents. While others who had independence, sovereignty, and self governance lost that independence and self governance. And so it transformed the societies there, and it's you can imagine the trauma. You can imagine people develop forms of resistance, and ways in which to escape that terrible tragedy that they were under. No, the war is not the first time in our history, in our long history, that we've had this sort of tragedy, and many identities as well get developed. Again, talking about this business of transforming identities, new identities emerge as a result of that experience that people have
Right.
over time. So these things are like they intersect and they overlap. The migrations of people within. Because think about it, people are moving about, and in part, groups of folks are moving about because they're trying to escape or get out of the reach of folks. So if you're in place X, if you're in Bassa County, you end up in Bummy, what today we call Bummy, because you're trying to get away and further
Right.
away.
Right.
Those kinds of things are happening all within the society. New alliances are being shaped and formed on the basis of that experience that people are having. So this early modern period that I'm speaking of,
Mm-hmm.
it basically is the impact of the European slave trade, and how it lands on the on the Windward Coast, and how it disrupts the society and ruptures it in so many ways. And the society itself is it attempts. People are attempting to. How do you get out of this, right? And over time, folks will kind of figure out ways to do it. But that early. And let me again, for our audience, it's important to understand what's happening here. I said it just now. I'll say it, it's not Liberia specific. It's
It's
happening
the
in other
whole that
parts.
coastal region.
Yeah, that disruption is happening in other parts. It happens as well that this Windward Coast area that we're having has a low population density, for one thing, and that affects us. It affected us then. It also affects us now as well. The question of population density. Um,
So
it,
did
it
they have to go inside to get
Mhm.
more Africans to come bring them down to the coast?
Yeah, all of that
Okay.
sort of thing is happening. Um, and but low population density also affects economic
Production.
production,
Yes.
right?
Economic production.
It affects economic production, and so those are like factors that, and many times I talked about what's distinctive about the periods, but one of the things that you'll find continuously, and I would argue even until today, low population density is like a recurring economic problem in Liberia. Another one would be the question of the productivity of labor, but we can talk about that part a bit later. But so
Okay.
the low population density, then again, has that, becomes apparent in that context there. So we see the development then, or the disarray, the dismantling, the depopulation, the etc. And it's great wealth and power that is being accumulated by the Europeans in doing what they're doing. It's important for folks to kind of understand as well the long-term effects of what this period meant. Because many times we sort of, why is Africa quote unquote backward? Why is Africa
Right. I was
underdeveloped?
going to come to that. Thanks for preempting.
This is the very moment at which that process itself begins. Right, the transatlantic slave trade is really the heart, the start, the foundation of the underdevelopment of Africa. Up until
Because
that point, Europe, Asia, there are different places in the world. There's not a big difference, but it is this moment, of destruction that begins the period of the long period of underdevelopment.
so you think the controlling factor was guns in terms of what really was the differentiation between them and us? Because most of the slaves were the fit ones, the strong ones, the ones that could really contribute to the farming, the other work, in the different villages and towns and cities. But they were the ones taken out. I mean, was it guns that really controlled that?
A combination, a combination. So what they're doing in the 1700s might be different from what's happening in the 1800s, and those, and whoever is caught, and who's caught and who caught, that would depend on the demand in the Americas, in Brazil, in the Caribbean, in North America. So quickly, for example, South Carolina in the late 1600s, South Carolina became a major producer of rice. And the South Carolinians came to learn over time about the skills that people from Liberia, but also Sierra Leone and other parts had in Guinea, had in rice production. Right. And I've seen, for example, in the archives, old newspaper advertisements in South Carolina, and they would say, just a ship XYZ, all these names, ship Jesus, hallelujah. Some slave ships had that name. Ship Jesus, hallelujah, has just arrived from the rice coast of West Africa. What are they talking about? They didn't say windward or what rice coast. So it's like right in this region, and with all these, with 99 new bodies, come buy them. Great for your rice plantation in South Carolina. And so they're not only destroying our civilization here, but they're using it to build theirs and build their wealth. And they're not only taking physical bodies, but they're taking knowledge with them. Because those people they built irrigation systems here. Meaning in West Africa, they cultivated rice. They have that experience, and now that knowledge is being transported by force over to South Carolina for them to do that there. But here in West Africa, people were producing for themselves. But in South Carolina, the Africans are producing, for export to enrich a particular individual or a bunch of individuals. Mr. Middleton, for example, who's the largest plantation owner, white man in South Carolina, becomes very wealthy. He's got oodles of cash money. He's the richest man in America from his rice that came from these Liberian, Sierra Leone, and Guinean farmers, etc. Right, and Middleton then can take his money and his children or grandchildren and use it to further industrialize and develop the United States. I mean, just that's world history. That's how that thing transformed.
Right. And some people may not know, but is it the Gola Geechee people or the Geechee Gola? But there's a group in South Carolina that were actually brought directly from the west coast of Africa, primarily Liberia, that really started the whole rice growing in that area. And some of them still exist. Yes. Some families are traced. I think the Smith family in Liberia is a family because we did a show one time for tourism and exchange. And the Smith family was one of the focus. They stayed, the house they lived in before, the area they lived in before they migrated to Liberia is still there. So, that kind of relationship, is there any positive to it today that we can extract?
That's a good question there. I'm just pointing out as well that Gisi people are in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea.
Right.
Just
So
so you know that, is that is this region. I mean, the borders themselves come later. At that point, there's Gisi people who live in a particular area, and the French and British kind of divide them up, and that sort of thing. And of course they're taken over there to South Carolina,
right.
and to enrich them. Yes, and so of course it is left to the descendants to now make, turn a lemon into lemonade, and make something of that, and there are people who are very conscious about building or reigniting links with the homeland. And from a strictly sort of business economic point of view, I think it behooves the three governments, actually. Why compete with each other? Work together. The three governments to come up with a nice sort of system, program, scheme, or peoples from three places, to make that link, to build that bridge, from this side, from the West African side, to the side there in South Carolina. I think there's a lot of potential there for, to add value in a whole lot of ways, because people are spending the money in heritage tourism. I think it's kind of what it's called, right? Heritage
Yes.
tourism.
Yes. Heritage tourism.
There's stuff to be made there, for
And
example.
that's very interesting, right? And somebody, I was listening to a program where somebody was saying basically, black people should be over slavery. They should be over, all the stuff that happened, right? But then this guy said, oh, the independence celebration that still goes on every year, the reenactment. Why you can just dismiss it and forget about it? Why is it a big deal? So for us, the point you just made is so very interesting in terms of how we can collaborate, with each other, with the different countries that's involved in this, and be able to use it beneficially.
Yeah.
And we see that in terms of some of us who believe in Pan-Africanism and stuff, but there are some people who are kind of xenophobic, or whether it's some people in South Africa or some people in Ghana, Nigeria, where they want their country only for themselves. How do we bridge that? How do we really become a unified African economy and be able to move freely? Because I think moving freely will be one of the major aspects that can catapult growth in Africa. Because when you look at the EU today and look at the movement capability versus where we have in Africa, the hindrances to go from one country to the next is really, kind of squeezing our potential. So how can we get around that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that this business of movement of people is crucial. Because I kind of had my my little structure in terms of like the discussion, because in the question you have, I have it listed down to discuss, but
Wow.
it's like, we
Okay, let's
know
go
that.
with your flow. Let's go with your flow.
Okay. So we're moving into this modern period,
Right.
and in the modern period, we're really talking about merchant capitalism, capitalist agriculture. Those I use those two terms. I think they're important analytical, concepts for us to get our heads around, to understand again the transformation and the change that is coming into the country. Because so the transatlantic slavery has aspects of merchant capitalism to it, but is that the main product is people. That's what the slave trade is, producing people. That's what it's creating, labor, for these plantations.
Right.
But there's a whole lot around it. People, the modern insurance industry, the shipbuilding industry, we get on and on and on. These things that depend on, that supplement, that service this very large economic system that's there. But in the case of the Windward Coast, we see that when the diaspora begins to start to arrive in 1820s, 1830s, the first sort of a bunch of them, they themselves are coming from societies where they are operating in the little cracks of the system. So just a quick example, everybody knows, all Liberians know J.J. Roberts, but they don't know that J.J. Roberts was already in business in Virginia before he left Virginia, right? So before he comes here, he has a little company, Roberts and Colson. His partner is a guy called William Colson.
Did Colson
And
come with him? Did Colson come to Liberia with
Colson
him?
didn't come. Colson didn't
Okay.
come. Colson was on that side. Roberts was on this side, meaning Colson was in Virginia. Roberts was in Liberia. And as you can see, they're partners. And it was like, well, you buy these items, You send them over. I will sell them. I'll buy items in Africa, in West Africa, and I'll ship them over to the States for you to sell them. That was
Wow.
their business. And they operated. They had ads in the papers. They operated. Roberts was actually a successful businessman before he got into politics. So he's actually he's connecting himself to these networks that already exist. There are prior networks that are there, African, the local people, indigenous networks that are there. And Roberts is making alliances and making partnerships with those networks. And they're selling dye, for clothing, camwood, that's what they use it for, red dye. He's exporting palm oil. They use it for machinery and that sort of thing. This is
Wow.
before the the discovery and use of oil. That's what they're using in machinery. And that's why it was a big export product, at that moment. So he's selling those things, and so he's a middleman, basically. He sets himself up as the importer exporter, and business is going. Now he's an example of this merchant capitalism that I'm talking about. And there's a bunch of them. There's a guy called Sheridan who came from South Carolina, black man, wealthiest Liberian. Later on, he sets up cocoa plantations in Liberia. It makes big boku, as we would say, boku money, with his little plantations and those things. Some of them are shipped. They build ships. They apply their little boats up and down the coast, going all the way down to Nigeria, up to Freetown. Basically carrying goods and moving things about the place. And they have a thriving little commercial group, and they're going with their stuff. All of that stuff comes to an end.
Wow.
In the 1870s, when we get the emergence of this new, very aggressive colonial project of the Europeans.
Can we say Firestone was a part of that?
No, Firestone is not nowhere
Okay.
in that process. This is all before. This is still in the 1870s, 1880s, 1860s. That's this kind of what I'm talking about here. And so that system collapses. And when that system collapses, of course, that also means that the sort of the revenues that the local state was depending on, that becomes a problem. To make it short, what the Europeans do is they say, our European ships will only trade with our colonies. If you're in, Liberia, you want to ship something to Freetown, you have to go to London first, and it comes down to Freetown. That's basically that's basically how they destroyed those. They destroyed those guys. Vice versa, they did that all with each other. So the French are only trading with the French, the British are only trading with the British. That was the system that they put into place, and that just knocked the Liberians out. And Liberians are basically subsisting on loans for quite a while, getting a new loan to pay off the old loan, and another new loan.
Dig holes to cover holes. We still doing it. We still digging holes to cover holes.
And they galloped along that system up until Firestone. There's a Firestone, and I've left a lot out, but Firestone marks the end of that's and the beginning of a kind of new system that emerges. And this new system, this sort of plantation agriculture, this sort of large scale production for export. The people who are working in the rubber plantations are not eating the rubber. They can't eat it. They're not producing. You remember the old days I said people produce what they ate and they ate what they produced. Now people are producing something for export, right? And they're doing it in terms of mass production with a mass labor force, production for sale, production for export. It's a new kind and type of economy that never existed before, because even the old coffee and cocoa plantations, those are like literally small little things, 10 acres, that sort of stuff, 15 acres. That's not mass, large scale capitalist agriculture, in which you have a labor force that you pay them, minimum, barely livable wages, and that's it. So that's a new system and a new model that emerge. Very similar developments are taking place again in other parts of West Africa. Similar developments are taking place in Asia. Similar developments are taking place in Latin America. That system has arrived in Liberia by the 1920s, and that shapes the economy as Firestone grew, as the first generation of trees matured, funds come into the government, and the political relationship between the government, or what I would call the Liberian state, and this massive international capitalist firm, that changes. Up until Firestone, the Liberian state its sovereignty or its independence was more or less it more or less had a little bit of room to maneuver. Um, and although the big nations, the big European nations, were always attempting to squat it and squash it and squish Liberian sovereignty, it still had that room to maneuver, and it could, it could go to the League of Nations, it could proclaim itself as a state controlling its borders, etc. But once Firestone got into the picture and was handing out big sums of money to the government especially by 1944. Before that, but especially by that point, when the real resources started to flow in, the government basically was at the beck and call of Firestone. I mean, that's just a fact. And we can talk next about how that new, what I call the late modern period, then emerges with starting first with, of course, with the Tubman administration, but then later on, the kinds of patterns that opened the door. And Tubman had a thing called the open door policy. You kind of have to think, why is there an open door policy? What was the door closed before, and what did it mean if the door was closed? Right. Closed to who? Right. And the door is now open to who? And so yeah, it's Firestone. It's that's when we see the entrance of small merchants from the Middle East into the Liberian economy, occupying the sort of like the middle spaces, right? The retail and those sorts of things. The sort of the banks start to come, and so we get this new system. Now the government has a lot of money.
You talk about us having like debt and borrowing. Mm-hmm. So was that Firestone situation or rescue situation in terms of relieving us of some debt and paying some debt for us?
That is how it was sold, and that is how President King and Senator Tubman and those people who were pushing for the Firestone deal, that's what they presented. They said, look, this thing takes us out of debt. And they had their supporters and people who said to them, yes, this is better. It gives us
supporters or sycophants. Supporters or sycophants.
No, I mean probably both. We exactly what makes the politicians at that time different from the ones of today. They probably have both. People who genuinely were, maybe you could say, naive and thought, this is a good thing. And those who are saying, whatever you say, as long as I get my share, I'm fine. You have a combination because, I would imagine, and let us think about it, people might, sometimes you want something to happen and there are unintended consequences. You're not aware of the full impact, unless you get to that place, but you haven't gotten to that place yet. And then you get to that place and you realize, oh, shoot, this is not really what I was thinking the outcome would be, but that's kind of what the outcome became. Right. The other important part in terms of the economy is that, so Firestone now becomes this major player for Liberia in a way that had never happened before. Liberia had never had that sort of investment. Someone with that much leverage. And Firestone then becomes a tool, if that's not exactly the word, but Firestone becomes a partner with the United States government. There's a kind of partnership there. And so Firestone can lean on the U.S. government because it has influence in the states, especially with the wartime, which occurs in the 1940s. And Firestone can lean on the U.S. government to do certain things. And the U.S. government, in turn, can say, oh, well, we have to help Firestone out because Firestone's success benefits us with the war and other matters. So, what I'm building up here is for the decision to build the Freeport of Monrovia and Roberts Field. Roberts Field originally was for supplying aircrafts, American Air Force planes, right, to come and go. Just think about the fact that the airport could have been built anywhere, really. It could have been built closer to Monrovia. It could have been built on the other side of the St. Paul River. It could have been built, but they built it right there on fire and next to Firestone for precisely the reasons that Firestone was there. Those sorts of things are happening there. Again, with the port, the building of the port transforms the economy, and within a next decade, with iron ore companies coming, the first iron ore company going up to the Bum Hills and that sort of stuff, they build a rail line, again, totally transforming the economy. There's two things that are happening. It is bringing an inflow of foreign capital into the country. Mm-hmm. We can discuss just the impact of foreign capital. But at the same time that it's bringing that inflow of foreign capital in the country, it is further deepening Liberia's underdevelopment. Is deepening Liberia's status. It's like specialization as a producer and an exporter, right, of raw materials.
And that's the
It has nothing
economic
to do with
growth.
Liberia.
That's economic growth or development, right?
That's
Because
right there, right
right.
there.
So
Somebody called it that, but that's the basis of it there.
right. So we got one or two questions. Let's just touch them before we go too far
Mm-hmm.
from the audience. One is and is kind of reflective of what was happening before. He said, um, were the settlers engaging agricultural practices? Not much is said about the use of the soil.
Now, of course, they were. Most of them were.
Okay.
The,
That's what I thought about it.
yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
want to ask.
the simple answer of that, all those places, Millsburg, Bensonville, all of those places along this, it doesn't seem Arlington, but those other places along the St. Paul River, Cruiserville, that's what they were. That's what they were doing there. They're not trading. They were planting or farmers.
So the agricultural activities did not come with the Firestone smallholder program where people were, basically funded to grow rubber and be able to
Mhm.
supply Firestone as well. It
No,
was before.
yeah, that's a completely new thing.
Okay.
What Firestone was doing, and really, again, think about the implications of these things. One of the things that Firestone, the rise of Firestone, the coming of Firestone, destroyed actually the smallholders, the previous
The
smallholders.
previous smallholders,
Yes, it
exactly.
destroyed them.
Yes.
It destroyed their business,
Right.
their
Then
businesses.
the second question is Ghana is championing the reparation for Africa, in
Mhm.
terms of slavery, as some of the black people, black Americans are doing for their duration of
Mhm.
slavery.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on the subject?
Mhm. Um, Clearly, the evidence tells us that the Europeans built their economies on the backs of black labor, African people, African resources, and enslavement, the enslavement of Africans, the dispossession of people's lands, turning people into commodities and made wealth. There's ample evidence for that. Um, the nature of the political system that we exist in the world, as it is currently constituted, I'm just giving you facts here.
Right.
They're not going to, under the current system or regimes as you see them, they're not going to give anybody reparations. They're not. That doesn't mean that folks should not clamor for it, and demand it, and make noise about it and mobilize around it. I think all of that is good. I'm just saying it's not going to happen, which doesn't mean people should stop. I think it's important that it's made a big issue for political reasons,
Right.
to be able to
You
shape the
can use
narrative.
it as a leverage tool, right, for
Yes,
something.
exactly. Yeah, to shape the narrative and the agenda. And when people come with their noise or saying whatever it is, you tell them move from here, man. We know why you guys are doing what you can do. You can show up the inconsistencies, the dishonesty, all of those things. It's very,
Right.
very important, I think,
Right.
when we have these discussions, for that to be part of the discussion. But they're not doing it. You see, a term I wanted to use that goes with late modern, because I'm looking at my phases, right?
Right.
Pre-modern, early modern, modern, and late modern, which is kind of down, 1940s, 50s onwards to today.
Right.
Imperialism and neocolonialism. These are like two terms that in the 60s and 70s, 80s, a little bit less, were much more in the air, and people talked about them more, right? And they exist. Those are models of economic activity. The fact that the IMF and the World Bank, have this enormous power over, the former colonies and countries of Africa and Asia, are examples of imperialism at work. So the fact that, for example, the military forces of the United States and France and Britain, etc., can still interfere,
Right.
with countries around the world, those are examples of imperialism operating. Folks, that maybe many people don't know this. For example, that the World Bank cannot develop a policy without the approval of the United States government, right? Despite the fact, so at the UN, people are aware of the veto. Everybody knows the veto. The US has a veto, France has a veto, Britain has a veto, China and Russia. And even that we should question, why should they have a veto and we don't have a veto, right? In the economic sphere, at the IMF and the World Bank, these two global monetary police, the US also has a veto. Like, so for example, the president of the World Bank always has to be a U.S. citizen, and the head of the IMF always has to be a European citizen, and those sorts of things, and many other little aspects of it. But the policies of those institutions, because those institutions are like credit rating agencies, that's what they are, right? So the kind of loans that the private sector, the private sector, the banks give to countries, the interest rate is dependent on the ratings that come ultimately from like the IMF,
Do we
right?
even have any rating? Our credit is bad. Do we have ratings?
Yeah, but I'm saying that the IMF could say, oh, Liberia is good, but you see, if Liberia is under, for example, IMF what, IMF Watch, or the IMF has said so and so and so about it, the IMF has graded it X, Y, Z. The other credit rating agencies take their cue from that, and then go ahead and do and they do the kinds of things that they need to do. I'm just sort of saying that we are supposedly sovereign, but there are all these everyday policy issues, that are under the
And
purview
because you said that, that's something I want to ask about, right? Because we are experiencing that right now. Okay, these folks give us these loans, and for example, we have a loan for like 20 million and a grant for 20 million for something called the LIFT project. I think it's the Liberia Finance Transformation Project or Initiative. Then we have another 30 to 40 million dollars for the GRID project, the government's reform and accountability, whatever. They have all these beautiful acronyms: LIFT, GRID. Then they got awarded the West African Regional, which would be another 50 million that we borrow, right? For all of these loans that we are taking, unfortunately, the way they structure, let's say the requirements for participation in these requests for proposals are just prohibitive to Liberian firms. They set a high security bid, 60,000, 50,000, where they know the bid security is just other Liberian companies, rich. They don't include any local content. And when Liberians try to push back on the local content issue, they raise the point that, it was not negotiated, especially for these current nearly $220 million we have on the table for, our digital transformation. Then they also put in requirements, like, for example, to build the asset declaration system, you must have built 3 before. To build the what they call the thing name, the business registry that has been built before by some of their own people and screwed up and is not functional anymore. So how can we get out of this trap? Because for me, it's like a trap. They really suppress the Liberian firms and don't give us the opportunity to be able to participate in our own economy. And that's what most of our leaders have been saying, but it's not happening.
Right. So and scholars call it the debt trap. Used to call that the debt trap, and explain precisely amongst that's another version of these traps. How do we keep these countries within the Western paradigm here? So we have to be honest. Many of us in the narratives, again, in our discussions, we frame the relationships of our countries and these big international systems. We make it look as if these systems are neutral, that these institutions are neutral. The institutions are neutral, and that the trade that we participate in, because we think about trade, is like two equal partners who are now negotiating and those sorts of things. When that is not the case, and indeed the very formation, the existence of those institutions are there precisely to maintain the unequal relationship, the relationship of dependent independence, the relationship of exploiter and exploited nations. It's those things are created to maintain that structure and that relationship. And so, and of course, people. This is not new in the case of all of these nations who have been. Just look at our African nations, independent for the most part since the 1960s. And Liberia actually is like a precursor. In many ways, all the African countries could look at Liberia's experience in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and say, "Oh, that's our future." If we kind of make these sorts of decisions, how Liberia became a neo-colony of the West and of the United States, is kind of how how it emerged in a whole variety of African countries here.
Right.
And so for the African countries to get out of this, out of the binds that they're in, they need to do some radical things. And what I'm about to say is not new. People like Kwame Nkrumah, after he got overthrown, he wrote a very good book explaining his experience. And it's like the lessons he learned. And it's available. Our leaders know that. And if you talk to some of our leaders, maybe one-on-one, after they've left office, they'll explain and tell you, yeah, that's true. The solutions have been put out there. In the 1980s, after the debt crisis, a group of African economists and other leaders came together and had the Lagos Plan of Action, right? And of course, up until this day, that's never been implemented.
So quickly, do you think Ghana is currently implementing the vision of Kwame Nkrumah? Because when I stopped in Ghana,
of course not. Of course not.
So they haven't gotten there yet, because
Absolutely
the dam that was a critical part of what he wanted to do is what they're actually using now for electricity and trying to expand some things.
Sure.
But in terms of his vision, how can you differentiate it from what they are doing now?
So Ethiopia just built a dam. Massively.
Yes.
They did it despite the advice of the World Bank and IMF.
And because the diaspora contributor and the government used its own money.
Right. But again, importantly, they did it despite the advice of the IMF and the World Bank.
Right? That's important.
Yes, extremely important. I said those institutions are not neutral, and our opinion makers. I'm not even thinking about the government. Our opinion shapers and opinion makers. So many of them, even if they're not in the government, they treat those organizations like it's holy writ. Right? The IMF said, the World Bank said.
That's a fact. I mean, I can't understand. Just explain to me. We are borrowing this money. The Liberian people will be responsible to pay this money back. But yet and still, there's complete capital flight. And sometimes, in my perspective, it's criminal the way this capital flight happens, where Liberians are locked out in terms of participating in these bids. They're not applying any local content. They push back on any kind of change. And unfortunately for me, in my mind, many of the people who sit at the table representing us don't come with the gravitas or the I should say, experience and education to actually argue, especially on the technical side, about how things should be. How do we change this?
So I don't think it's as simple as that, and I'm not trying to. I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying that it's more complicated. Because
I don't disagree, but you can share the complication.
No, because if you look at how Liberians themselves got into jam, and it's easy to blame everything on the war. No. William R. Talbot, a very experienced man, got himself into a jam, big jam. His advisors with plenty of economic history and economic policy knowledge and experience, Ellen Sirleaf and Byron Tarr and all of these people, many, many more, his cabinet, D. Franklin Neal, all these people, right, who are there. It's not as if these are people who didn't have gravitas. They had gravitas, right? And yet they kind of like marched into those situations. It's complicated that way. It's more than that.
But okay, let's get into why it's more than that, because we need to understand why they don't represent the best interests of our country.
So I said earlier on that one of the problems consistently in Liberia's economic past is the question of low population density. Low population density. Let's look at some bigger structure. Let's widen the picture here a bit. And the low productivity of labor, especially agricultural labor, right? It remains a problem. So how do you deal with that? It's kind of like if you're ill, you go to the doctor, the GP, and the GP says, I'll take a blood test here. And what I'm trying to look at here is if you have deficiencies in certain vitamins, etc. Right? And you might say, oh, that's it? Small issue. You need more vitamin D, you need more vitamin A, you take those things and it starts improving different parts of your system. You may not see it as a big deal. You want to be able to say, hey, look, I have more muscles, but that's not going to just happen like that. So right. the issue of population, the issue of productivity of labor, those are things that need focus. And how do you work? How do you start to address some of those issues? And there are other issues, but hold on there for a second. Because in the kind of global environment, economy which we exist in, globalization, etc. And for years now, economies of scale are crucial for economic efficiency, right?
Yes.
And you can't deal with economies of scale with the small little, businesses that people look. What is the size of the average agricultural plot in Liberia? Extremely small,
Very small. Less
way
than
too
5 acres.
small.
Less than five
Yes,
acres.
very, very small. You can't produce much with that. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna happen. So
But
what type
but
of
we need we
reform?
need we need mechanization, right?
Yeah.
We need
But we need consolidation and
we
concentration.
are, some cooperatives are being established now, but not enough to
Right.
scale up to the level you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
So I
That's
totally agree with that.
when these folks who we're competing with in France and in the United States and all these other places talk about this, these are gigantic. They call them farmers. These are gigantic things,
Enterprises, yes.
huge. But part of our solution also means that yes, Sierra Leone and Guinea and Ivory Coast, we're right there, right? And there's economies of scales there that can be looked at. When we talk about markets, the development of a domestic market is crucial because that's your launch pad if
Right.
you're going to go global, etc. Right? And if you look at Europe, you mentioned that earlier, how the Europeans are like, hey, no, we need to compete, and so they open their borders amongst themselves there. The Germans sell cars to the French sell cars to the German. The Germans sell beer to the French sell beer to the Germans. Vice versa. The Italians sell wine to all of them. They all sell wine to the Italians. That stuff is happening. There's no reason why club beer shouldn't be, thinking
Oh,
about export to Sierra
we've been
Leone
having
and
the
vice versa.
Africa, the
Huh?
Africa Continental Free Trade Area
Mhm.
for the last 10 or 12 years, maybe.
On paper.
And many people have signed and ratified it within the different governments. But for us to move it, again, transportation is a huge problem. So should we embrace the China Belt Initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, where we can really develop our infrastructure? But then how do we protect ourselves from the exploitation of China? Because we see what they do in our different, especially in the mining areas, how they have no respect for our environment. So how do we balance those things?
So we can make decisions as a region. You can do the dam over there. We'll use the money we'll build the roads over here. We'll build particular things over there. But you have to have that regional idea in your head.
Mindset, yes.
I am a believer in having a continental currency. That's not going to happen, but it'll help the people of the continental. But okay, short of continental, a regional currency. And then CFA has been able to
They had the
survive.
West Africa monetary zone. I don't know what happened with that.
No, CFA still exists. The French CFA is there for them. But
Okay.
even amongst us with our little Lyon and Sealy and Liberian dollar, they can start among themselves. How many? If you add the populations of Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia together, that's quite large.
I think
That's
yes.
quite large. We do not have a market. Meaning a stock market. In effect, a market, right? We don't have
even a
secondary.
products market or trade
Yes.
board. We don't even have it.
No
And we
secondary.
talk about it all the time. But
Secondary thing. But then there's some even more basic things. Your man George Family always talking about this business about ID. Very crucial. It's kind of like that.
Right now we're fighting on it. Right now the government wants to give this group called OESD or deal where they would take 70% of any revenue generated from ID cards when we can do that ourselves. I don't understand how that's why I'm talking about the people who go on the table to negotiate or to bring these people. Is it that they don't understand the big picture where our country should be going, that they would take our assets and
tell me
rob our people to just maybe for a few dollars to give these people the full right to capital flight?
So tell me something. If these people, whoever they are, get this contract and produce a top first class biometric system with IDs, etc., and they chop money for themselves in the process. But at the end of the process, the output, the deliverable was there. Would you say no? What would you?
I got to do a full cost benefit analysis around that, right? Because I got to understand if your deliverable, the impact of your deliverable. Let's say they are able to do all the cars and everything fine, right? And they get that $40 to $50 million out of the country, and we don't develop any skills with regard to being able to effectively transition from them, that turnover piece, where we would, instead of at that 15 or 20-year point being able to execute all of those responsibilities and produce our own cars, we still got to go back and contract with another. Then they haven't giving us the impact or benefit we need. If, let's say, we are not utilizing that, because national identification is the foundation of our entire country. We're not going to move forward if we don't have an efficient national identification system, an efficient land system. Those two things are so critical to anything we do as a nation. But sticking with the national identification, if we don't have that, whether it's birth, whether it's social services, whether it's really tracking our data, whether it's employment data, whether it's banking information and stuff, we still would be left behind. This whole digital transformation we're talking about and moving towards digital payments and elevating our economy, we cannot succeed with those things without having an effective national identification system. If that job that they do can really transform us in that direction, where our population data is correct, our election data is correct, our national security, social security information is at the right level. All of those factors, if they are in place, yes, then it can probably be worth it. But the point is, we can do that work, or in partnership with them, we as Liberians, tech companies can do that work. And that's that's the transformation we need from government in terms of the mindset to be inclusive when it comes to Liberian participation in all these kind of things.
So, I mean, to me, the gap doesn't seem that large. When I say gap, between the intention, and what is actually happening, I don't really know this, but just listening to you, it doesn't sort of like really seem that large.
I think progress being made.
Yeah, it sounds like people are saying a piece of the pie and let the Liberians, get some Liberian knowledge, know-how, get involved in that. But even when after that has happened, I'm again coming back to this question of the productivity of labor, about population, right? And I'm saying that 5 million, national unit of 5 million people, is an incredible obstacle to launch a country, with the sorts of disadvantages historically created, right? It's incredibly difficult. And that that a minimum requirement, is a market of about 20, 30 million, which, just basically even amongst themselves, you can say, oh, I'm doing a soft drink factory. And if you have a soft drink factory for 20 million people, one factory can provide, cannot provide for 20 million people. The demand there for cloth and so many different sorts of things. You can, talk about economies of scale. You can now speak in those terms, right? And you can attract labor, and again figure out ways to, look for funding, and indeed, again, as I said before, now you can really seriously talk about creating a market and a marketplace for money, right? In the sense of hey, look, we trusts and whatever you names those things are called, all those various vehicles that people use and need for financing things. This is my market that I'm looking at. When folks are looking at a market, say, what's the size of that market? And you say 1 million, they're like, stupid, suck their teeth.
Right.
10 million, 20 million. Okay, let's discuss.
Your point is solid, and that's why I think the regional perspective or the African perspective, the continental perspective, is what's going to work. Because I was just looking at Tanzania. Tanzania has probably a 56% population density, but the economy is picking up and thriving because they're near 40, 50 million people over there. So we are limited by our population, and I think if Liberia, and you say Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, but I will add Ivory Coast as well. If we include this West African or this ECOWAS kind of
not even ECOWAS, just Manu River Union.
Yes, thank you, Manu River Union. Just use the Manu River Union. We have a critical mass that can elevate. And now I guess with the bridge at Kavala and the whole I guess the Transco or whatever electricity that's happening down in that southeast, it could really make a difference. But it has to be intentional. It has to be, from a national commitment and a regional commitment level.
So the other long-term, when you look at economic problems that countries have had, or the economic histories of countries, is a question of the surplus. How do you first generate a surplus? And then what are you doing with that surplus? And when I say surplus, what is he talking about? That's production and consumption.
Right.
And if you are producing more than you consume, that's the surplus. The difference is the surplus. If your output is larger than the amount of consumption that's going on, that's the surplus there. And so, how do you expand production, but more, I guess, more importantly, how do you organize the economy in a way that you're able to generate the surplus, and that means putting people to work. Definitely putting people to work. That means, when you talk about mechanization, it means, manufacturing. I mean, to me, services, as important as services are, manufacturing is still key to industrialization, to the transformation of that economy. But again, you need scale. You need a domestic market. You can literally, it's easier for the countries themselves to sort of be able to. Let me put it this way. I'll keep using the example of beer,
Right.
which is a manufactured product with lots of value added. And I'm sort of saying that, look, if you've got a market of 20 million people, right? There's no, you can get big capital intensive production. You can get all kinds of production. You're selling your product here cheaper at same quality product than any imported stuff that comes. And there you go. I'm just that's like an example. Multiply this so many times throughout the various types of commodities, types of items, manufactured items that people need, and the fact that there's more urbanization in the society, also makes it easier. It facilitates this sort of thing to take place.
Talking about beer, I was impressed with the the Serengeti beer. I mean, everybody was drinking that beer in Tanzania. It was very. I'm like, if I could get $1 for everybody who buying this Serengeti beer, I'll be rich.
Mm-hmm.
But our club beer has been a national staple. And some people say, oh, the war happened, they destroy everything, they didn't destroy beer factory, right? So so that is a very key product in our thing. But how do we really get towards this light manufacturing? Because before the war, we had sugar, we had all these different products being manufactured in Liberia.
There are countries in the world that don't grow rice but have rice mills.
Interesting. Yeah.
There are places in the world that I've seen and visited. They have rice mills, but they don't grow rice. So it's all of that. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know who owns club breweries, for example, but like, if club breweries, and I don't know the logic for them, but I'm thinking to myself, imagine if club breweries sold shares, don't have to sell. Just say show 49% of its value in shares, so that they maintained majority ownership. But so shares, what's that doing? You're right away. First of all, you're creating a market for those shares.
Right.
You're already doing that, but you're also expanding the capacity of that entity. Right. You're expanding its productive capacity. You can use that new money to invest in new technologies. For producing it, you can expand it. But at the end of the day, it needs a market. It needs to know that it has a market in Liberia and also that region.
It's good.
Says to them, in 5 years, in 10 years, we'll recoup all of this money and make even more money. But
what are your thoughts on diaspora investment? Because I'm involved with
There's an example. That's an example. And I'm sure some people have been going around talking about diaspora funds, all those sorts of things. You gotta have a diaspora investment fund. The fund is investing in things like that. Right, investing in the brewery, investing in jetty, whoever. I'm just giving examples. Investing this, that, or the other. The diaspora.
Yeah, but our perspective is, how can we take part of our economy back, right? Because people, coffee, everything, other people are importing it, and they have controlled that import sector in a way that blocks out other people. Yeah, for example, even to the detriment of people who want to import and compete, they can lock them out. There's ways that they have done that.
So that's one way you can start with your fund. But I mean, it's that's what we talk about, political economy. Again, let's look at our history as a lesson. It is politics. Politics and business are not separate, and so you need to come and you need to build some political muscle, and that means making sure that the sorts of people who are making these key decisions are folks who have a vision that involves, in this case, expanding and encouraging an indigenous Liberian business class, and I'm not using it in the Liberian sense of the word, a Liberian born and bred business class, developing that business class. And all over the world, you look around the world and you see that happening. Laws get passed, people do what they need to do to make sure that they're developing that particular group
Okay.
people.
Some people say the population issue should not be a major concern because there are countries of similar population, Singapore, maybe I don't know
No,
the population of
no,
Switzerland,
no. People
but
make that example, or there's a bad example. Singapore is a city. Please, no. Singapore
okay,
doesn't have Liberia's history, but first of all, it's a city, so like, please, no. You compare Singapore to Monrovia, that's what you compare it with. You can't compare it to Liberia. Singapore is a city. I've been there. Singapore, you compare to New York or London or whatever. You don't compare it. The city and city is not compared to Cairo, whatever. And then you can say, hey, yeah, Cairo should do better. Singapore is not. It's a city state. It's not. It's not.
but when we talk about Lee Kuan Yew and his
Nah.
MPH merit,
So,
honesty,
so
and
one of
all of
the
those.
things, one of the things that I will say that Liberia could take from economic history wise, could take from Singapore, is Singapore has what they call a provident fund. It's a heritage. Some other countries many countries have it. The heritage fund. It's like
Right.
these sovereign funds, and Liberia would do well to create a sovereign fund, meaning the Liberian government, the state, create a sovereign fund, and like the monies that it gets from, say, gold, like it could take.
Gold, iron ore,
Yeah,
now
it could
oil.
assign X amount of the royalties into the fund, that sort of thing, and the fund grows that way. Some of the monies that go to pensions, etc., can go to the fund, so that even the national, what's it called,
Social Security.
insurance, the national social security, right? Because national social security invests its funds, right? That's what they do. That's
Yes,
how
they do. They
and
do.
so they could invest and the investment could be them putting it in the heritage fund, right? Because the heritage fund is growing, it's gaining fact, and that sovereign fund itself then buys things, because the Saudis sovereign fund, they buy the Chinese sovereign fund, they buy the Waldorf Astoria hotel, they own that. You can, the world is large, you can go anywhere and buy up things. I mean, and make a big return on it.
Yes.
You pay your different people, but a sovereign fund, has a certain, it has the benefit of being, it's a state, so it's large. It's much larger than just individuals doing particular things. But it's something I think they should look into. Another couple of other things too, I think they should do. We used to have a housing bank. I don't know what happened to it. I think it closed down.
Housing bank, agriculture bank.
We used to have an agricultural development bank. What happened to it? Those things need to be resuscitated, of course. And again, I wouldn't be surprised that people like the World Bank and IMF and them at some point sort of said, nah, don't do it. I strongly suspect that those issues would have been brought up, after the war, and that administration was probably looking down on doing such things, or say, I have more important things to do. No. Those are all the little things that are very, very important. Because again, we're talking about, listening to you raise the issue of finance.
Yes.
You just with access to finance, not access to money. And so here are all these sort of like institutions that are the possibility of creating them and being a way to mobilize these.
And then if you don't have identifiers or identity set, if you don't have clear land ownership and stuff, for the banks to even trust the people to give them money, that's a problem. So those fundamental things need to happen for our economy to move forward, plus the infrastructure, the electricity, the technology, and everything like that. So, I know we're supposed to do this for an hour, 30 minutes, we're nearly there. But in terms of solutions and in terms of some recommendations for the next period in our economic history, if you can predict or give some insight or some thoughts on where you think that direction should be for us to really elevate ourselves and elevate our people, eliminate some of the poverty, it would be very helpful for the audience.
I think that the people of Liberia are very resourceful, and I think there's lots of evidence of that, of their resourcefulness, and that they're brimming with, I think, ideas they might not have, and the energy. They have all of that. I think they might not have the sort of the opportunities to do particular things, to let them move out there and do the things. I think you mentioned some important things in terms of like the legal system, making sure that legal system works for people, and this business about contracts and being able to enforce contractual obligations. That's a powerful small thing, but a big thing. One of those small but big things, and creating financial financial institutions, intermediary institutions, like these various types of banks that are, again, focused on, because beside like an agricultural development bank or housing bank and things such as those, also a kind of small business fund, for small
Right.
scale entrepreneurs,
Right.
for the Yana boys and that sort of thing. I mean, just that, just having a small. They used to have something called CFO, Small Enterprise Funding Organization, in the 70s. I don't know what happened to it.
Wow.
In the
Okay.
80s, yeah, that existed.
I mean, they're
They had a
based on
window
the
in all these
test.
banks. The commercial banks had a window. That C4 basically had a window there in those in the commercial banks, where you kind of like, where people went to. A person want to open a barber shop, you can go there. That Grameen Bank model, it was, folks were doing that stuff here in Liberia back in the day. So I'm just saying that those financial intermediaries, how, kind of thinking about a structure that brings them in. So at the big level, this business is about regional or sub-regional integration, at the very large, at the macro level, and then things like a heritage or a sovereign fund, a government sovereign fund, and these other financial intermediaries. I mean, there's a lot of that. Of course, there's the issue of the education system and working on that and energy, electricity, and I think that'll happen. I think that's bound to happen.
What?
Folks expected everything to, like, everything goes back to normal. No, but I think it's happening. Even as we speak, it's happening, and the more Liberians depend on themselves, and give each other the opportunity and space, to take initiatives and encourage.
And that's the question I was just about to ask, that this person is asking us here. Why Liberia always giving all the resources to companies from outside? Why the government never run our own resources? Mm-hmm. But they can give it to Liberians, right? I don't think there's been any Liberian that has owned an all black. I think there was a group that kind of just leveraged it and sold it off. What's it? Mm-hmm. I don't want to say. Was it Pepper Coast? I can't remember what the name was, but there was one group like that. But I think now is the time with more Liberians, I should say, involved with the global economy, for Liberians to have opportunities in terms of, a Class A mine or,
and that's good and well. But I'm like, how about small scale light industry?
Oh yeah, I mean we want all of that too. I totally agree with you. Yes, would you be focused on that too? Because that makes a big difference.
I would make that a priority, actually. If anybody asked me, I'd say, like, go for that. Because again, I a small economy that has only 800,000 people or something like that has a rice mill, and they don't grow rice, in the Americas. And I'm like, wow. For me, it was wow. What does it take to put up a rice mill? How much money do you need for a rice to build a rice mill?
And we got some little rice mills, but this government has emphasized growing rice. So hopefully we can see some results, from that in the next couple of years, or even less if possible, because our brown rice, our black rice in Liberia is very nutritious. It's good for some other health reasons, whether diabetes.
Maybe the consumers may or may not want it, but I'm just saying, even if it's then that they're importing stuff to then be milled, that would be.
But there are leverages the government can pull to be able to force people in those directions, whether it's awareness, whether it's
incentives and disincentives. That's true.
All that kind of stuff being prohibited. Yeah. So just our last education from one of our people in terms of club beer history. He said ChatGPT says club beer is produced by Morovia breweries. It was founded under Liberian law and began brewing club beer in the early 60s. It's reportedly a subsidiary of Diageo PLC, multinational beverage company. That's good. Thank you, Monyu, for sharing that information.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we see there's no local ownership per se. And then there was something with Semenco. They wanted people to buy shares in Semenco, but again, it was a secret thing. It was limited. So we don't know who benefited from those things, and the transparency level in terms of really sharing with the people, all of these things has been very limited. So we just hope.
More. Mhm. I mean, you know, again, I'm curious about people like, and perhaps Diageo has subsidiaries in Cote d'Ivoire and Guinea, and certainly I don't know, or some West Africans can gather together and kind of create their competition. But the market again being big, you know, you move on. But like the Semenko case, you know, why doesn't Semenko want to expand? We kind of like we might like question, you know, why just stick yourself to Liberia? They're neighboring countries, and therefore sell shares. You can expand. You can expand your your scale. You can scale
And
up.
that's why I admire Dagoudi for. He tries to get into
Yes,
other African countries
yes,
and really do business and do
yes.
business in his home country,
Mhm,
Nigeria, as well. So
mhm.
we need some of that from our well-off Liberians who have the ability and the business sense to do this, to expand. I know one or two are doing some stuff, but it's not hitting the radar or rising above the horizon for people to see
Mhm.
that, Liberians entrepreneurs across the continent are doing, XYZ.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we really appreciate this session from you, Doc.
Okay.
It has been, like the audience, some people say it's a very learning experience for them. We hope to, continue this OG show to be able to bring people like you who have the knowledge, who have the experience to share with our audience. So you have the opportunity for your parting words, and then we can let you go.
First, I should say thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure and great to share, and to your audience as well. You know, I think that hold tight, Liberia, hold tight. You know, to your beliefs and your love for the homeland. You know, and work at it. You may not think about that old phrase, the phrase of I may not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. You know, it's there, and people work today, right, so that you know tomorrow is brighter, right? Whether or not you arrive, you lay the foundations now. So the kinds of things that you're doing, it's good. You know, all these conversations that people are having, you don't know on whose ears it falls on, and they get an idea and they kind of work towards those things, and that's all to the good. I think
Right.
you know in whatever sector, you know, somebody benefits or something happens, everybody benefits, you know, when those moves are taken afoot. So yeah, that's it. I'm an eternal optimist, even though I
I'm similar. I'm similar. And some people have a problem. I mean, why you think Labrador can be this, Labrador can be that? But I'm just positive about the
yeah,
potential. And when I
yeah,
interact with some of the young people, seriously,
yes,
many young people in Liberia, they got so much
absolutely,
talent, so much,
that is true. Yeah.
smartness, so much capability, so much
Yes,
intelligence. It's just
yes.
that they're not allowed to let it grow. The
Yes.
opportunity is not there
Mhm,
for them. So we
mhm.
just gotta be pushing until more
That's right.
people can try to give our own people that support and opportunity to
Don't give
expand,
up.
rise on and
Don't
grow.
give up. Don't give up.
No,
Hope, keep
no,
hope
we
alive.
can't. We
Yeah.
can't.
All
Thank you,
right.
Doc. We really appreciate you, and
Thank you.
the audience definitely appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye bye. Yeah. So that was Dr. Herbert Brewer. That was a very, very positive engagement. We really appreciate him for sharing his knowledge, and this show will try to continue to push. Hopefully, the next show will be next week Saturday. I may be traveling during the week, and hopefully, I can confirm because I want it to be a technology show. I want some of our technology professionals and experts to have a little panel discussion about the digital transformation in Liberia, the direction it's going, the level of participation of our people, and all of those things. So I really appreciate the audience. For those who stick with the show, it's a little long, an hour 30 minutes, and most times for us, our attention span for educational or substantive issues can be limited, but we appreciate those who stay with us and continue to participate. Definitely the audience helping us to research and helping us to ask questions so we can get a better understanding of the stuff we're talking about. It's very, very important. So thank you, and hopefully next Saturday we'll be able to bring you something on technology, on digital transformation, and hopefully it'll be directly from Liberia in a panel situation. So we thank you, and we look forward to engaging. And to the person who asked, um, I don't know whether they asked on the show, but somebody asked, how can they do this? Reach out to me directly, message me inbox or this number right here, 301-655-5984, and we can discuss how you can do it too. Because we need more voices. We need more people who can come and talk about these things, who can try to educate our people and let the information be there. They may not readily access it, but at some point they will come around and be able to access it. So thank you. We look forward to bringing you another edition of the OG show next week Saturday. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.